Hello, good afternoon and welcome along to Unbelievable. I'm Justin Briley, your host for the show that brings you conversations that matter between Christians and non-Christians every Saturday here on Premier Christian Radio and indeed around the world via our podcast. So welcome along however you're listening. And I've got a discussion today on secularism between a Christian and a Muslim, James White and Abdullah Al-Andalusi. It's time to turn our attention to this week's discussion.
You're unbelievable.
Well, today on the programme, we've got a Christian and Muslim dialogue on how to respond to secularism. It's my great pleasure to be joined in the studio today by James White and Abdullah Al-Andalusi. James White, well known as director of the Alpha and Omega Ministries, regularly engages in dialogues with Muslims on the claims of Christianity and Islam. But today, in conversation with Abdullah, who also regularly engages in the intellectual defence of Islam in debates and dialogues. And today's show, not so much debate necessarily on the doctrinal claims of Christianity and Islam, though we've plenty of those in the Unbelievable archive if you want them. It's more a dialogue on how, in their different ways, James and Abdullah, as a Christian and a Muslim, respond to the growth of secular values and ideology in the West. So we're going to have an interesting discussion today, I feel, on this subject. James and Abdullah, welcome along to the show. It's great to have you both with me today.
Great to be back.
Great to have you.
Pleasure.
It's been quite a while since I had you on. I'm sure we have had you on in the distant past at some point, Abdullah, but
about 10 and a half years ago.
Yeah,
you and I've been on in here.
That would have been it. That would have been it. But it was a long time ago, believe it or not. So, so great to have you both in and with me today on the show. I'm very happy to see where this one goes, guys, because we normally are, debating the Trinity or some kind of central doctrine of Christianity or Islam. Today, it's more a kind of social secularism, kind of ideological discussion on this. Let's begin first of all with you, Abdullah, as someone who perhaps is less familiar to show listeners. Have you? You haven't always been a Muslim, have you? What brought you to the point of believing that Islam is the way?
Okay, well, just a brief intro. I consider it to be a rather boring journey in my case, because it was no there was no fireworks or was it Damascene moments? It was rather just in essence me investigating and kind of searching for the truth, noticing that there are different religions in the world, and that was my religion, which I suppose at that point in time was something about between nominal Anglo-Catholic and Catholic. But I just kind of viewed that, how do I know that particular religion I was following was true? I could have been born in India or China and been a Jain, Buddhist, Hindu, or any other religion. So I just started to investigate different religions and beliefs, even atheism, and even very, you could say, eccentric concepts and beliefs, Wiccan and all that kind of stuff. It was really out Rastafarianism, at least it was kind of quite...
You kind of looked into all of them at some level, did you?
This was before the internet, so I used those old-fangled things called libraries, and... I kind of just did my own investigation, and then I think, when I was about 14, I converted to Islam.
Right.
But as I said, I was kind of young, and so I wouldn't purport to be an expert in any particular religion. But since that point in time, I've always engaged to re-examining all different religions and beliefs, and obviously I'm always constantly learning and always re-examining my own presumptions. And kind of searching myself for any assumptions or presuppositions that I haven't checked or challenged.
And you've been willing to obviously do that in dialogue and debate with people like James over the years. Have you guys met in a couple of other ways beyond Unbelievable?
We've done debates. We've done debates. And then we did a dialogue a couple of years ago at Kensington Temple.
Okay.
In regards to... Peace and
War and Peace, right?
Okay.
Not the book review, but just the topic,
the concept. Yeah. James, you're well known to many Unbelievable listeners, having been on many times.
I don't even know.
Oh well, we don't bother counting anymore, do we? You were an early adopter, let's say, of Unbelievable. But and although we don't see eye to eye on all matters of theology, and
you and me, really?
Apparently not. Nonetheless, I always enjoy having you on, hearing your perspective. And especially, we haven't done a dialogue with a Muslim actually in a little while on the show, so I'm really glad that we've got you in, Abdullah, for today's show. But You do get criticism from your own quarters sometimes for doing these kinds of dialogues and debates, James. And why is that? Why are people not always so happy to see you on stage with a Muslim debating these kinds of issues?
Well, unless I'm attacking Abdullah and condemning him and just basically quoting the 4 spiritual laws to him, which Abdullah knows what I believe. He knows I've written books on this subject. He knows I've done other debates. I don't need to be repeating the same thing over and over again for him. Unless I'm doing that, there are a lot of people that feel that to show respect for someone else is to in some way compromise on the unique claims of the Christian faith. And so the biggest thing that happened, I did a dialogue with Dr. Yasser Qadi. I'm not sure if you saw that, but it was a 2-night thing. One was in a church, one was at the mosque. And it was extremely respectful. It was uncompromising. We were very straightforward that we do not believe the same things. The attacks that I got primarily from Christians were absolutely amazing in the United States.
Right.
Not so much overseas.
Interesting.
And so there is an American element to that I saw very, very, very clearly. But I've always confused these poor guys because they can tell I don't compromise. I believe what I believe. I don't back down. But I hope they recognize I care for them as individuals. I really do what I do. I mean, Abdullah and I have had lunch at a Turkish meat place? What was that place? I forget where it was. But
it's Turkish grill house.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And I want to do that kind of thing so that there is a connection on the personal level. And that changes how you do apologetics.
Sure. Yeah.
It takes it out of the realm of the merely theoretical, and now there's a flesh and blood human being there. And it changes how the debates take place. Yeah. It changes the temperature and the depth to which you can go.
Yeah.
So it's different.
And in a sense, the Islam side of what you do, the dialogues and engagement, James, has kind of grown over the years. I mean, was it back in the early 2000s that you really started to engage?
2006, Shabir at Biola University was the first time.
And what's changed in, I don't know, I guess the last 13 years or so, in what you're kind of anticipating engaging with? Has obviously any of the recent, world history, if you like, made a difference to the kinds of issues you tend to be debating on stages with Muslims?
I've seen changes on both sides. Honest with you, for example, the first time I engaged Adnan Rashid, Adnan spent a lot of time at Speaker's Corner. And at Speaker's Corner, you learn to yell at each other.
Not the most convivial of places.
No, it's not. And
it's got its own unique culture, let's say.
It's a unique culture. And that's not really my thing. And so over the years, that has changed. That has shifted. And I think that's allowed us to address some other topics that you normally would not be able to really. I want to get into deeper and deeper things rather than just constantly. It's one thing to deal with the important stuff. It has to be dealt with, but we have dealt with it many, many times. There's all sorts of other things that we need to be talking about that would be extremely helpful. And I've seen some of those doors opening, not as quickly as I would like, but I have seen a development, a change. And Abdullah will tell you about some of the early YouTube videos that he posted. You have that interaction, you grow, you learn. Hopefully, you sharpen your arguments and
we all
things
develop,
like that,
don't we, in various ways. So we're here to talk about secularism today. We're obviously going to have both of your perspectives on that. I mean, I think probably everyone's in agreement around this table that there has been, if you like, a growing movement, secular movement across the West, especially in all kinds of different areas. How we actually address that and how Christianity, Islam, and other worldviews are keying into that is the important thing. Now, what have you seen? I mean, you say you started researching this stuff before the growth of the internet. Well, we're a long way beyond that now, Abdullah. How do you see secularism particularly impacting the Islamic community here in the UK and elsewhere? What kind of response do you see from your colleagues, friends, when it comes to some of the issues that are going on around us?
Well, it's multifaceted. So I'll just say that one of the reasons why I wanted to do more dialogues with kind of like-minded Christians and like-minded Jews as well, from kind of following the same kind of Abrahamic strand or more influence, is because, in essence, certainly Muslims, we're kind of stuck between, let's say, two camps, right? So you have the quote-unquote conservatives on the one side who view Muslims with suspicion, and in some cases as a fifth column, as disloyal or a dangerous threat to an element, repeating the same kind of tropes that was the anti-Semitic tropes 100 years ago, and in England the anti-Catholic tropes 200 years ago, right? And on the other side of things, we have quote unquote the left wing, and they're more than happy to say, yeah, we'll have alliances, we'll protect you Muslims, and all you have to do is, we'll give you all this protection for the bargain price of your soul, so to speak, where you'll have to agree with certain liberal values concerning same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships, not viewing it as a sin, because that would be a socially an oppressive idea to believe in or to express. Even though we're saying, well, we're not going around forcing anyone or saying anything abusive to people. We're just believing that we have a particular theological position concerning that.
And this has been obviously expressed recently, and is it Birmingham where the issue has come up with the teaching of a certain form of around same-sex relationships and so on in primary school, and that's the response to that from parents in that school has been primarily led by Muslims who have felt we don't believe that's the right way to be addressing issues around sexuality at this particular age with these kids, and that's been interesting because that's been where you've seen that flashpoint, especially between Muslims and their local council and school and everything else. Who and is that one example where the left wing, if you like, is willing to say, we will accept you as long as you abide by these particular ways of looking at life and sexuality and so on?
Certainly. I mean, firstly, it wasn't a statutory kind of requirement, those particular lessons called. It was called No Outsiders. And the argument was that in order to make children and, of course, society not look at each other as being outsiders, we all had to accept that each other's life choices were morally equivalent. Now, they would argue that, we didn't say that, and that wasn't part of the curriculum. But even when they were defending it on TV, various pundits and others were arguing that the way to kind of for tolerance is to treat all life choices as morally equivalent, whereas that shouldn't be the requirement. The requirement is that we should be, you could say, tolerant in the sense of I don't involve myself and impose myself upon your life, and you don't impose yourself upon my life. But we should have the right to differ. You don't have to agree with people to be defined as tolerating them. Right.
And so when you've got this, on the one hand, perhaps Muslims viewed with suspicion by people who are maybe on the conservative wing, on the left wing saying, we'll defend your right to be who you are in your community, but you have to abide by certain values. Where do you find yourself in the midst of that yourself, Abdullah?
well, stuck in the middle, as this famous song lyric goes. Yes. The problem is that it's unfortunate because I've encountered and spoken to some Conservative Party MPs and during my many debates and things where I've encountered them, and a lot of their values, it coincides with an Islamic viewpoint. In fact, some people who criticise Muslims for being contrary to British values, well, if we were 100 years, if we came 100 years ago, it'd be more in line with traditional Christian Victorian values. I mean, not every single thing, not every single Victorian value, but just its Christianity and Judaism offer a lot of commonalities with Islam and Muslims, and many conservatives who are basically devout or practicing Christians or Jews or who take it seriously, we have much common cause with them, and they needn't see us as a threat or an enemy.
Do you think this is the time for more alliances to be developed between Muslims and Christians of a like mind, Jews of a like mind, who kind of at least have a common goal in terms of some of the social aspects of what they believe are happening in this country?
Oh, certainly. And this is this is part of the reason why I kind of suggested such dialogues. For understandings that the debate is good, and we should continue to have robust intellectual debates and discussions. That's what obviously part and parcel what having a healthy society is about. But at the same time, just recognise that instead of this idea, which many people on the right just view Islam as, this is a enemy invading force, or it's a threat or a danger, we have to contain it, we have to disassociate ourselves from Muslims. They're facing some of the common problems themselves, and maybe actually they shouldn't look at us like that, but more as allies.
Right. So you think it's time for Christians to see Muslims as allies rather than enemies when it comes to the common cause that they may feel there is in this area. I mean, James, obviously the issues are slightly different here in the UK to the US.
Yeah.
But you're probably familiar with this Birmingham situation and the No Outsiders program that Muslims especially were campaigning against there. I mean, do you find yourself on the same side very often with Muslims when it comes to the social, cultural issues, or do you find there isn't that much overlap yourself?
Well, you got to understand, I live in Trump's America right now, and that has so polarized everything that it has created massive polarization within the Christian community as well. Yeah. And I think the last program was on the social justice stuff that I did with you. So you know that there's that type of stuff going on in the United States. And so it's even worse with this situation. The problem that we are facing, I hear everything that Abdullah was just saying, and I just look at the Christian community as a whole in the United States, and there's just too much fear. For so many, there is on one side, there is on sort of liberal theology, don't care about the differences that we have with Muslims, and they're not going to be doing the debates, they're not going to be doing the dialogues, they're not going to be approaching Abdullah and talking about what the Quran says about Jesus or things like that. So they're primarily focused upon social issues anyways. But amongst conservatives, there is such an element of fear that the very idea of talking about anything other than the sources of that fear is pretty much off the table. And when I've tried to do anything that would allow for any discussion, and every Muslim I've talked to, they all know exactly where I'm coming from. They know what I want for them. When Yasser Qadi and I had our dialogue, one of the things we talked about is, what do you want for me? What do I want for you? We laid it out on the table. Obviously, he wants me to confess, say the Shahada and become a Muslim. And I want him to know who Jesus Christ was and his resurrection and so on and so forth. We laid that on the table. Then having said all of that, and as that conversation continues, and we're not putting it off to the side and saying it's not important. It remains important. But at the same time, we've still got the secular world demanding not only that we accept, but that we celebrate values that are fundamentally opposed to what both of our scriptures say is what is best for human beings. And so if the society is demanding of us celebration of that which would require a fundamental rejection of our most closely held beliefs, how do we respond to that? And if we're both it's the same issue that is facing both of us, how then can we relate to one another?
Well, we're going to get into this, and if you're listening and you would like to give your thoughts on this particular issue, we're talking about secularism today, how Christians and Muslims are responding in different ways. James White and Abdullah Al-Andalusi join me on the show. You can email in as well, unbelievable@premier.org.uk, or send us your thoughts via our social media, @UnbelievableJB for the Twitter, facebook.com/UnbelievableJB for Facebook, and all of those links and links to today's guests available from the show page. You can find that at premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
We're just in the last few minutes of this first section of the show, guys. Let's kind of tease out a little bit what's underneath all this. You've mentioned that both scriptures, if you like, speak, the Quran and the Bible, to a lot of the issues going on in society at the moment, secularism and so on, James. What's your response as a Christian? How should Christians, in your view, be if they feel that society is moving in a direction that goes against, fundamental biblical truths and that sort of thing? What's the proper response of a Christian, and what do you think is the response you're seeing from the Christian community and indeed from the Islamic community?
Well, this is fascinating. It does get us into, I think, to one of the most important, where there is a difference that we have to discuss in our approaches and the foundations that we have. Obviously, from my perspective, from the Christian viewpoint, God as creator means that God has the right to determine, not just simply by divine fiat, he can do that as well, but since he's the creator, he's made us to function in a particular fashion. Albert Mohler uses the term human flourishing, if we want to use that terminology. Fine. Without a creator, there is no basis for law that is going to be consistent from generation to generation. It simply becomes mob rule. And so, from my perspective, confessing that God is the creator, that we have a creator, therefore there's purpose, absolutely central to understanding who Jesus was, redemption. It's central to the Christian message. But part of that, and this is where I want to have some conversation at some point with Abdullah, but part of that is from the Christian perspective, we believe that man is made in the imago Dei, the image of God. That is not a Muslim belief, not in that terminology. In fact, that terminology would be classically rebelled against any type of image of God language at all. But the Muslims have a concept of the mithaq and fitra. The idea that there is a covenant made with Adam, that we were all in Adam, and we all confessed Allah as God, and that the leftover, the echo of that in us is the fitra. It's an almost innate understanding of who God is, the fact that we are His creatures, that we are related to Him, that we owe fealty to Him or submission to Him or whatever else.
It's like innate human nature,
right?
That we are created with an innate nature to worship and recognize God and be pleased with His commandments.
Right.
And also that in the Quran it mentions, I think something similar to what the imago Dei concept would be in Christianity, which is that God has honored the children of Adam with dignity. Mm-hmm. So all humans possess innate dignity. And we can either choose to live up to that, or we can choose to go against that and rebel against that. And so it's similar concepts, or rather we get to the same conclusions.
And that, I think, becomes the necessary element for both sides in response to the secular demand that we, in essence, embrace a worldview that sees us as accidents. Would I be correct saying that within the Islamic worldview, we could never view ourselves as mere accidents?
Oh, no, of course not.
Right.
Everything in this universe, is, according to all our beliefs, is intended by God to happen.
So far, a level of agreement that there's, in both Islam and Christianity, from that perspective, God has, if you like, decreed that humans have some kind of integrity. It's the image of God in Christianity. It's this idea of, I can't remember the words, but the fitra in Islam. And that kind of gives rise to the idea that there are certain things that we are, if you like, subject to. We don't simply make up our moralities as we go along. There are sort of ways in which we are supposed to live as humans in the world today.
And that also then means that the state, see, we have to ask the question: is there a authority above the state to which we can appeal for issues of universal justice? And both sides would say there most assuredly is, and that's what a totalitarian state does not want to hear.
Right.
And that's why in China they're blowing up Christian churches and mosques. Why? Because both have that same fundamental belief that undercuts the totalitarian claims of Chinese communism.
Oh, indeed, in China as well, so much were their concern for controlling religion that when the Catholic Church were obviously wanting to have Catholic services and churches in China basically, the government insisted on creating a separate Catholic Church of China, not under the control of the Pope, right. Just to kind of show you their perspective. But you have things which are quite similar in concern in many Western countries, where the concern for controlling religion that they deem to be either touting beliefs which threaten the nature of the republic, like France, for example, which has been traditionally very anti-religion, and believing that people should be free from religion. And to manifest that, you should ban religious symbols from schools, and you should ban the public space from religious observances, which has included, banning the niqab, as well as actually banning public prayer in public areas.
Well, I'd be interested to come back to a few of these examples in the next section of today's show. And I think I will probably play the advocate, at least, for the secularist as well, and throw in some of the kind of responses that I think would be there if we had someone who was sort of in firm favour of a secular approach to life. So we're going to be talking about this on the rest of today's show. A Christian and Muslim dialogue on responding to secularism. James White and Abdullah Al-Andalusi join me on Unbelievable today, and look forward to hearing more from you as well during the course of today's show. We'll be back in a moment's time.
Christians, we face great challenges in our day. Fake news, skepticism, disbelief. Friends, join the revolution. Speak truth to a post-truth world.
Do you want to share your Christian faith with confidence? Do you want to speak truth in a post-truth world? If so, don't miss Unbelievable the Conference 2019 in partnership with ADF International and Biola Apologetics. Join me, Justin Briley, and over 10 world-class speakers, including Krish Kandaya, Christy Mayer, and Bruxy Cavey. Rediscover the reasons for the hope you have and find the confidence to share it boldly. Unbelievable the Conference 2019, Saturday the 20th of July in London. Book your early bird tickets now at premierchristianradio.com/speaking truth.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Well, it's Justin, back with my two guests on Unbelievable today, James White and Abdullah Al-Andalusi, a Christian-Muslim dialogue on responding to secularism. And I've already heard this morning that you apparently are the best-dressed Muslim apologist out there, Abdullah, and James White is the most tech-savvy Christian apologist. So
I still have pictures from our first encounter in this studio.
Yeah.
And you had your robe and
my turban.
Oh, yeah. He was
Okay.
very
and James White's been missing that kind of look ever since. He's like, every time we meet, it's like, why haven't you brought your turban and robe? So.
Well, look, it's great to have you, however you're dressed. And of course, dress sense does actually come in sometimes to some of the discussions we're having today on the kind of flashpoints between secularism and Christian or Islamic beliefs and rights and so on. Before we get into some of that, obviously something that has been big in the headlines recently, in Sri Lanka over the Easter weekend, 3 churches and 3 hotels were bombed, as far as we know, by a small Muslim extremist group, but the death toll stands at over 300. I'm sure everybody agrees, tragedy, terrible. I think that the big questions that it raises, though, is this what our current sort of world looks like when it comes to the ways that Muslims, Christians, others are going to be engaging with each other? Obviously, we've also had the tragedy of the Muslims who were targeted at the mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and all of that kind of thing. I mean, what's your overall response to the fact that this kind of violence exists and this is the way it's perpetrated sometimes by Muslims against Christians or secular people and so on? Abdullah, what's your take on that, and how does it feed into what we're talking about today?
Well, I'm deeply saddened, and I find it just horrifically disgusting, the kinds of violence that would be perpetrated against people who are merely going to places of worship, be they Jew, Muslim, Christian, or anyone else. And I think that I don't think this is representative of the particular engagement of civilizations or religions, but rather these are political causes behind this, not religious causes behind this. And these individuals are certainly not acting within the remit of any particular religious tradition, whether be they the Lord's Liberation Army in Central Africa, or the anti-Balaka movement, who they purport to be Christians, and they tell Muslims that you must embrace Christianity, otherwise we'll kill you. And they commit cannibalism. And these things, I know, are not taught in the Bible, right? It's just an identity they've adopted, and they use that to define them as a group, and then they commit atrocities. And likewise, same with anyone else of any other religion and belief, because they're strongly condemned from the pulpits and minbars across the world. But like all kinds of violence, you'll probably find it rooted in the grotesqueries of certain human proclivities that unfortunately we've seen throughout history. But it has nothing to do with scripture or revelation.
What do you think of that, James?
Here's what I'd like to see, and what I think needs to happen is we hear the Wahhabi Salafi defenses from Islamic sources, hadith, things like that go against the developed Sharia of later generations. We hear them arguing by basically saying, all that stuff that developed later on, we need to get rid of that. We need to go back to the earlier sources. We hear the many in the Salafi movement and things like that saying. And what we need to hear from folks like yourself and those that are condemning these things are consistent, foundationally documentary-based argumentation that says, for example, in Surah 98, when it says that believing Christians who reject the message of Muhammad are the worst of all creatures. How is that to be understood in an overarching? Because as a Christian, when someone points me to what happened with the Amorites in the Old Testament or something like that, I have a biblically based, not excuse, but I think consistent interpretation of Scripture that takes me to the New Covenant, to Jesus Christ, and then give me an explanation as to why those things happened in the past. And one of the things I've been inviting your side to do is we need to see publications from well-known people that lay out the same kind of argumentation from your perspective that would take away surahs like or quotes like Surah 98:6 and say this is what is meant there, and this is why there is no basis for someone to do the things like they did in Sri Lanka.
Well, I don't think that theological condemnations of people who reject guidance has any connection or link to justifying violence against them. For example, I mean, certainly in Calvinism, the belief in complete depravity of those who are not saved, who have not embraced the truth, and not been saved by grace, doesn't justify now killing people who are viewed to be theologically completely and totally irredeemably depraved. So Salafis or that particular movement, or however you want to define them, is actually not the arguments that are used by people who commit acts of terrorism. I've done many lectures throughout the UK and globally about the justification of terrorism, the causes of terror acts, and Osama bin Laden himself, considered to be the father of a lot of these groups out there today. He was asked in an Al Jazeera interview in 2003 is it not the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad that forbade the killing of non-combatants? And he said, yes, you're right, it is prohibited by the Prophet Muhammad's own words, and the scholars have said the same. But then he argued but this teaching isn't absolute or set in stone. And he then argued that, well, America attacks our civilians, and so this gives me an exception to the rule. I view it that's an exception to the rule. That was his argument. It's rejected theologically because we don't believe in exceptions to the rule. We're very adamant that if God gives revelation, unless God himself specifies an exception to the rule, you can't just invent an exception to the rule. So this is actually his defense. But no ISIS follower or no terrorist of any flavor has ever advanced a surah of the Quran or a narration saying that, oh, look, we have to kill disbelievers because they are disbelievers or because they're not Muslims or what have you. They never advance that. They usually always argue, they always say, oh, we're just responding to Western foreign policy, or we're responding to colonialism or what have you. That's their arguments. Because Christians have lived amongst Muslims for centuries, and Jews have lived amongst Muslims for centuries. The oldest churches in the world or some of the oldest churches in the world can be found in the Middle East, and I'm proud of their preservation. And I react, like all Muslims, with complete horror when churches that have been safe amongst us for centuries get attacked. And
but why then has there been this rise, this spike in persecution against Christians, for instance, the bombings, those sort of atrocities that we see, like Sri Lanka?
Well, and let me piggyback on that, because this would help me. If my understanding is, and the information is spotty right now, but my understanding is these were suicide bombers. So in other words, these individuals died. They gave their life for something. What would their motivation be if it was not theological?
Well, look at the history of Sri Lanka itself. Sri Lanka itself, we saw the Tamil Tigers, who were a Hindu nationalist group. Well, they were a nationalist group. Hinduism was only incidental to their kind of belief. They were communists, and they were the ones who, during their heyday, committed the most suicide bombing and terror attacks against Buddhist shrines, even Buddhist temples in Sri Lanka. You see, and they didn't believe. I mean, the communists presumably didn't even believe in any afterlife or gods or what have you. So the question really should lie at the feet of the depraved individual who committed such acts, because we've seen that communists who have no hope for an afterlife have been motivated to commit suicide attacks in the past, and indeed they were the ones who were the forerunners, so to speak, of that, the ones who were committing the most of that during their time.
But even Muslim on Muslim attacks between Shiites and Sunnis and things like that, what is how can someone give their life in that way from a theological perspective? Isn't there some theological concept of dying as a martyr, providing them with a guarantee of heaven?
Well, it's kind of like there's a saying that to a builder every problem looks like a nail that could be hammered in, and because you specialize in theology, you try to derive theological explanations for events which can be explained much more simply and as any criminologist would say, through other motivations. So, for example, in Vietnam, you had the pro-American South and versus the communist North. You also had suicide squads, which were launched by the communists against the South, and you had internecine fighting between these two factions, of fellow Vietnamese against fellow Vietnamese. And what happened when the United States kind of deposed Saddam Hussein was they started to treat the Iraqi Shias and Iraqi Sunnis and Iraqi Kurds, who are also Sunni, majority, as different separate factions. And then they started to act as different separate factions, as the American government played one group off against the other, divide and rule like the British did in India. So this would explain, like it would explain the internecine fighting in Vietnam, like it would explain internecine fighting in virtually every country that has been touched by colonialism or by outside intervention, that when you depose the power structures in that society and then you start playing off the factions against each other, they will start fighting each other, unfortunately.
Are you saying that the theological reasons that are given by some of these groups, martyrdom and so on, the establishment of a caliphate, whatever it might be, that these aren't the real underlying reasons why these acts of violence are occurring?
Well, you see, it's kind of post hoc justification. So it's not one where they say, oh, this verse of Quran tells us that we have to just kill every single non-Muslim on the planet, which is ridiculous, because there's verse of the Quran that mentions not only not to compel people to Islam, but also that God created the world with multiple religions and intended that to be so. So it's not for any Muslim to compel people into belief. Belief is only for God's remit. So God controls who believes and who disbelieves, right? So that's not an argument they use. What they kind of use, they might say, they'll bring a verse of Quran that just talks about fighting for justice, and they'll say, well, okay, we are fighting for justice by doing these horrific acts, which they're not, right? Or they'll take very general verses, and then they'll apply it in a specific context where the verse itself does not mandate that they do in that particular action. The word justice has probably killed more people than any other appeal to God. As people say, we're fighting for justice, we're fighting for retribution, we're fighting for vindication. These words, no one ever says that justice, the word justice should be kind of, let's say, effaced from human consciousness because it causes lots of wars and killings and violence and revenge attacks. So it's just people with their typical, unfortunately, post hoc justifications for their criminal intents.
James?
Yeah, it just seems, I think it's very, very important from a Christian perspective to recognize that term justice means a tremendous amount to us. We certainly wouldn't allow it to be banished, but we just had the celebration of the resurrection in our calendar, and that's where ultimate justice has been established in our understanding. And that's why, for example, we have a Christian worldview that has a basis for law that can transcend cultural barriers and things like that, because we believe not only are we created by God, but that God has an intention and a purpose in making us the way he made us, and therefore we are to seek justice in our world now, but we are also to recognize that cosmic justice is God's responsibility. He's the one that's going to bring that about, and he did that first and foremost in the person of Jesus Christ. And so when it comes to social justice issues, and maybe we're taking a turn back to where we were before here, I don't know. But when it comes to social justice issues, one of the things that I argue is that the Christian has a unique take on this, because of the fact that we believe that God has demonstrated his absolute concern for justice. It's not just a concept floating around out there. There was a cross, there was an empty grave. That means God is deeply concerned about justice personally, and in fact did something about it. All of that takes us back to where we had agreed before, and that is, since we're made in the image of God, God has demonstrated within Christianity the value of human life and has given us guidance in these things. Now, I could have pursued, and we could have gotten into a debate about the various groups that want to argue about what it means to be a martyr and things along those lines. But I think it's probably more important right now to focus upon where we're going in light of the fact that I believe that my ability to do what I'm doing in the United States, I've had a webcast actually longer than you've had a webcast, which is an amazing thing. I fully expect that freedom to be taken away from me within the next few years. I really do. I do not believe my voice will be heard freely in that fashion. And hence, before that happens, we have to say the things that we need to say. And I don't know if it's going to happen, how it's exactly going to happen, but I know it's going to be governmental demands that you say certain things in a certain way and that you take certain positions on certain social issues. And that pressure is coming against both of us on very similar issues because of the totalitarian mindset of the left that simply can't allow even for debate to take place.
Well, this is, I suppose, if I can put on my Mr. Secular hat, okay, and say, but James, perhaps what you're both looking for is a theocracy, okay? And that's often the view, is that if Islam, in terms of what Islam wants to bring in, is often, many people see it as sort of some kind of parallel legal system in Sharia. They want to see ultimately everyone submit, that there is a kind of an element by which Islam won't be satisfied until everybody comes under the Islamic rule in that way, and the whole world in that sense is submitted to Islam. And I think many people hear what you're saying, James, about there being this foundational ultimate sort of standard to which we're called and which God has laid down for people, as saying, so if you're gay or if you basically are not a Christian, you are ultimately subject to these rules. And what does that look like? Because we've got to get along with each other. We've got to accept that not everyone's a Christian, that people are going to have different points of view. So is what you're asking for kind of the same thing, a theocracy in the end, where everyone has to accept some kind of...
Well, I'd point out to the secularists that technically we're already in one. The Queen is the head of state and head of the church, and we have bishops in the House of Lords who basically can preside over legislation, presumably from a Christian ethic. And that system was served to, at least in theory, protect the interest of people by having an established church, and so there was no worry about all the churches that could take over, like the Catholics or what have you. That would allow tolerance because you didn't have to worry about fifth columns taking over the state because you already have a church that can't be moved out of its position, so they didn't have to worry about clamping down on heretics and all those such things. So that was how the British state was, certainly how Edmund Burke also praised it, that it was a state that had different checks and balances by having religion as part of the state. And I've actually debated at the Oxford Union, this is quite in a surreal kind of debate, actually arguing against this establishment of the church, mainly because what comes after will, I fear, be a type of militant secularism that won't advance the kind of tolerances that the Church of England has through its broad ecumenical approach to religious beliefs in the past. So that there's that aspect. And as for the issue of the kind of, or the theocracy fear that all Muslims are having their own law system. I mean, firstly, these are the same arguments they said about Jews, that Jews were going to bring in their Talmudic law to dominate Gentiles, and Gentiles will be made subject to them. And what Protestants said about Catholics, that they bring in their canon law and popishness, and we all Protestants will have to bend the knee, so to speak, back to the Pope again. The thing is this, that Islam never has envisioned or advanced that the Sharia should apply to anyone other than Muslims. And how that looks like in the state that we're in is the same as it looked like for a Catholic or anyone else who wants to refer back to their religion for voluntary arbitration tribunals, which is allowed under the law. Jews have the Beit Din, which they can refer to as their arbitrary tribunal. And the Jewish law is remarkably similar to Islamic law on many things, in fact. But this fear about Islam is more from a different basis. It's not from the basis of that it represents a legitimate threat, but rather they view that if people actually adhere to a religious basis they view to be greater than a state or between liberal values, this is somehow a threat to the state.
I mean, typically, though, my secularist friends will say, look, we can work out the fine detail of how we're going to accommodate religious concerns and beliefs and so on, but we need a secular basis for government. And in a way, this is what you've got with, the Constitution in the USA, separation of religion and state, so that we can say we're going to just say everyone's going to have their ability to do what they want as long as it doesn't infringe on the freedom of others to do what they want as well. And we're going to have to work that out as we go along. And this is what you seem to be concerned that this is tipping over for you, James, into actually, no, it turns out you don't have any rights to say or speak or believe what you want.
No, you got
and
to
understand. What's changed then? Why was it working?
Changed. The people changed. I mean, John Adams, one of our founding fathers, said that the Constitution was written for a religious and moral people. It is absolutely insufficient for the governance of any other. And we don't have a religious and moral people any longer. And therefore, the Constitution, God bless it, it was a wonderful experiment. But the fact of the matter is, once you start treating it like a quote-unquote living document that gets to be reinterpreted in any way
it is almost treated like the Bible or the Quran.
Exactly.
By many people in the States.
It had a meaning, but who cares what that is anymore? That's exactly what is being done by the liberal justices on the court. And no matter what happens in the next 5 years or whatever else, eventually you're going to have enough liberals on the court to turn that thing upside down. And so all the protections that it has provided for all these years are simply going to vanish. And it just seems to me that the form of secularism that we see in Europe and flowing freely across the pond to the United States is a form that has no basis within it to allow for freedom of religious thought. It's totalitarian. And look at their universities. I'm not sure if it's happening here, but in the United States, if I were to try to have a conversation on almost any state university in any state in the Union in the United States on the subject of marriage or human sexuality from Jesus's perspective, would not happen. It would be shut down violently, if need be, by people screaming, throwing things, riots, everything. We see it happening all the time in the United States right now. And I don't know if that's happening here or if there's been some equilibrium established or just what it is.
There's been a certain amount of what's been termed no platforming of speakers who student bodies and so on are unhappy with and not happy with the particular views they hold and that kind of thing. I mean, to some extent, I wonder, though, is that just, in a way, there is a sort of a new, social movement happening, and we're obviously we're well into post-Christendom in the UK, and to a large degree we're getting there in the States as well. And is this just the case that whether we're Muslim or Christian, we have to renegotiate and we realise we're no longer in power? Okay, fair enough. We're back to where we were maybe with the early church, where we have to understand that we don't have an automatic sort of right to this, that, or the other, and we have to negotiate from a position of being more on the margins, or that kind of the yeast, if you like, that is meant to leaven the. Well,
this would be where there would be somewhat of an interesting question as to whether there's a difference here, because from my perspective, our Lord said, "The world will hate you because it hated me." So the idea of a non-animosity from Jesus' own teaching is not a possibility, because Jesus says things that the secular perspective simply cannot accept. When he says, when we describe him as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and that he rules the nations with a rod of iron, that does not leave a nice, squishy way of getting into the middle and let's all just be nice to each other. And that's why secularism says, no, we're going We are going to silence that kind of proclamation. We are not going to allow that kind of speech in the public space. What about Islam? Is there within Islamic theology the idea of an inherent animosity between a religious system that refuses to acknowledge Allah as ruler and Islam? We have, Jesus specifically said, "I'm going to hate you because they hated me."
I mean, the verse of the Quran that talked about certainly the polytheists at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the polytheists will generally they want to silence you with their mouths and destroy, and they want to quench out the light of God's revelation because they dislike what it has to say and how it forces them inside themselves to think about something greater than just their worldly affairs. But on a different kind of note, just to explain the mechanism, as sort of anyone who says, how is secularism? Why did it move from being neutral and tolerant to now being impositional? It's because John Stuart Mill in the 19th century had this quote, amazing idea on his book on liberty, that it's no longer sufficient to just protect people from the state, because a person is more oppressed if they're in a society whereby their views or tastes are looked down upon or disagreed with. And that's, in a way, a greater oppression than a state banning something. And then this created a kind of a sea change within liberal thinking, that it's no longer just a state banning things that's oppressive, but people holding views or your lifestyle choices in disdain because it contradicts their particular, let's say, worldview, that is oppressive enough, right? And that should also be dealt with. So they would view that it is oppressive for you to merely state out in public that you think that same-sex marriage is a sin or same-sex intercourse is a sin. That's an oppressive concept. And many Christians in this country recently, over the years, and growing in number, have actually been arrested for saying those very things.
Well, you certainly had
public.
The most recent example was this rugby star, I think, who tweeted views about believing that homosexuality is sinful and so on, and has been, I think, booted from playing for the national team and so on. And those are the consequences, if you like, of saying certain things out in public these days. Now, again, putting on my Mr. Secular hat, a lot of people say, well, hey, no one's stopping you saying that, but there's going to be some social consequences if you say that, because the tide of opinion has changed and you can no longer say those things without expecting certain kinds of consequences. Now, he's not been jailed for that. He's not been,
Yet.
But that's the point. Is the point at which, where does the kind of line between the social consequences, where you just have to accept that you are in the minority now, James, maybe, and you as well, Abdullah, and the world will hate you for the views you have, and you just have to live with that. And where's the point at which actually there's something has changed where legally you're suddenly no longer able to do the things.
Well, it's due to the contradictions in the argument. So in the Quran it says that because at that time the major civilization in the world was the people of the book, so the Christians and Jews. They were, the West wasn't secular or atheist at that point in time, and so the Quran commands Muslims that do not dispute with the people of the book unless you witness them committing injustice. So as long as they're not committing injustice, you shouldn't dispute with them or have any arguments with them, so to speak. And the approach is basically the call to consistency, as I heard James also mention many times throughout the years.
That's right.
Because obviously it doesn't mean that, if you see them going against the Quran, dispute with them. No, because they don't believe in the Quran. But injustice is defined as them not treating like cases the same and them giving preferential treatment. So if they say that you are oppressive for merely holding or expressing views, which we're now going to kind of deal with, then they have themselves now become the oppressors, because they are going to now say that we hold your views in disdain and we're going to commit actions against you which are going to be prejudicial to your interests and your livelihood. And to disagree with you on one point, that people have faced the wrath of the services, the government services. Police have arrested Christians in public for expressing homosexuality as a sin in UK. I documented a number of cases on this. So it's not just social consequence. And also, lastly, people would say that if you, let's say, fire someone from their job because of their lifestyle choice, let's say they have a same-sex relationship, that's discrimination. But then what about firing a Christian or firing a Muslim or firing a Jew for just expressing their beliefs, which is their lifestyle choice? They're not consistent on their own basis.
This is where the rubber hits the road in so many of these cases, isn't it? We're going to go to a final break, and we'll have some time to continue to mull over these issues. We're talking about secularism and how my Christian guest James White and Muslim guest Abdullah Al-Andalusi believe their different perspectives should be responding to some of the issues that often come around on this. We've covered a lot of ground already on the show today. We'll continue to do so in a moment's time. You're listening to Unbelievable, the show that aims to get you thinking.
Premier Christianity Magazine. In this month's issue,
another street preacher arrested. A nurse sacked for sharing her faith. Many are asking, is secularism on the rise? And if so, what should we do about it? Plus, we interview Christian Concern's Andrea Williams, the worship leader Lou Fellingham, and the woman who survived the Rwandan genocide and learned to forgive her enemies. And if you're wondering which of the many Christian festivals to attend this summer, we've got a quiz to help you decide.
for your free copy, visit premierchristianity.com/free sample.
Welcome back to the final part of this week's edition of Unbelievable here on Premier Christian Radio and available around the world via our website, premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. There you can find the podcast links, you can find the episodes, you can comment underneath recent editions of the show, and links, of course, to our YouTube channel, the app, the newsletter, ways to give, the book, the events, and much more besides. And thanks to those who've been getting in touch via Twitter to talk about the big conversation live in London that happened this last week. DP Smith 101 says, fascinating first discussion for the big conversation. Favourite moment was during one of the questions. A flaw in an explanation purely reliant on evolution does little to explain the short-term benefits for early first-century Christians facing immense persecution. You'll understand the context of that question that was asked that DP Smith is referring to there once you were able to hear the full discussion that took place between Brett Weinstein and Alistair McGrath. And Gerard, who I think is responsible for a sort of meet-up group on the intellectual dark web, says, many thanks for an excellent talk this evening with Alistair McGrath, together with Unbelievable JB, who did an excellent job chairing. Everyone enjoyed a spirited and lively discussion on the utility of religion and limits of rationalism. Excellent stuff. 10 out of 10, says Gerard. You can make your own mind up on that when we release it a little later in the year. If you want to catch up on last year's episode, season 1 of The Big Conversation, available at thebigconversation.show. And a quick shout out to Carl, who was also there, an email to say thanks so much for organising and moderating Wednesday discussion. Our office Christian group used this as an opportunity to invite colleagues to an event. All of my colleagues thoroughly enjoyed it, and it prompted lots of good conversations afterwards over dinner. You say you wanted to ask a question, but unfortunately didn't get picked out during the audience Q&A. And it was a good question here that you wanted to ask, Carl. Sorry you didn't get to ask it. Maybe another time. You also ask, are you aware of similar types of events happening in New York City? Following the success of this one in London, I'd love to do something similar with colleagues in our New York City headquarters. Carl, I don't know of any specific dialogue events like The Big Conversation happening in New York, but others may. We have listeners in New York who might be able to point you in the right direction. Do feel free to email me, unbelievable@premier.org.uk, if you can help Carl out there with similar events to Unbelievable happening in his neck of the woods. OK, so that was some of the responses to The Big Conversation. Looking forward to releasing that later on in the year. And we've got some of your responses to recent editions of the show. Specifically, last week's one has produced a big mailbag. Religious Fictionalism with Philip Goff and Christy Mayer. Christy, of course, one of the speakers at this year's Unbelievable Conference 2019. Do try and get down there if you can to London, Saturday the 20th of July. And today's discussion actually picks up on some of the issues we will be looking into during the conference, especially with our guests from ADF International, who are all about helping Christians navigate freedom of speech, freedom of religion in places like the workplace and society and culture and so on. Gay cakes, abortion, freedom of religion. Those are some of the issues that we're going to be covering with our guests from ADF, Lawrence Wilkinson, Ryan Day and Lorcan Price. And some of those will be joining me on forthcoming editions of Unbelievable as well. So you'll be able to hear them in action on the show before we get to the conference. But don't delay booking in, because the early bird ticket price ends at the end of this coming week. It's the 19th of May, Sunday the 19th of May, that you need to have booked in by in order to get the cheaper early bird ticket. After that, it goes up to the standard rate. There are also discounts for students and youth workers, and you can also get the special offer of 2 or more tickets. Get a free Unbelievable Conference 2018 DVD. Go and get yourself booked in for this year's conference at the website premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. Links there to book in for this year's Unbelievable Conference 2019. And before we get into the final part of today's discussion, a quick note that I'll also be actually talking about my book, Unbelievable, Why After 10 Years of Talking with Atheists, I'm Still a Christian, in Woking. That St Columba's House are hosting me very kindly for a book group discussion meeting. So if you want to be there, it'll be at 7:30pm this Thursday, the 16th of May, St Columba's House in Woking, and I'll be talking about the book and helping to lead a little discussion group on it. So if you can make it, be glad to see you there.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Well, we've been talking about a Christian and Muslim response to secularism today. Obviously, just 2 guests who join me today with their own perspectives on this, and you can find out more about them from the webpage where there are links to both Abdullah Al-Andalusi's website and, of course, where you can find more about James White as well. premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. But we've been certainly hearing their 2 responses to the if you like, the increase in certain secular values and ideology and so on. James, you predict that you won't be able to broadcast your show in the not too distant future. Let's say in 10 years, and you think that's probably a generous estimate.
I think so.
You weren't able to host a show any longer in which you were openly saying this is, this stands against God's law. This is not,
any biblical worldview perspective. Yes.
Right. What if that reality came to pass? What would your response be? How do you respond as a Christian in a world where your views are effectively no longer welcome, by and large, in society, and have therefore been a cap has been put on them?
We have something called the Book of Acts, and we have the example of the early church, and there's going to be the need to count the cost, and the proclamation of the gospel and God's truth is not something that is an option for Christians. It is what we're called to do. And exactly how that's going to look for each individual is a little bit different. I'm a member now, an elder in Apologia Church in Arizona. We do a tremendous amount of work in regards to saving children at abortion clinics and things like that. We already know that local law enforcement wants to see us shut down. When that happens, we pull together and we defend that person, and we gather around that person, and we give of ourselves. I don't know how it's going to look in the broader community, but we can't stop. It's what we're called to do. As unpopular, look, how were Christians viewed in the early church? What were they called? They were called the atheists because they said there were no gods. They were despised for hundreds of years under Roman rule. That did not stop them. And we look back at them today and go, oh, man, if we could just be like them. Well, we may end up having to learn a lot of lessons from that
At the same time, Paul was writing to his churches and saying, as far as it depends on you,
exactly.
live at peace with the people around you.
Exactly.
So that it's not as though he's saying, get up, riot, push back against the authorities.
No,
so what is the balance there?
The riot issue isn't a possibility, but neither is the offering of the pinch of incense on the altar and saying Kaiser Kurios, Caesar is Lord. We've already said Jesus is Lord. We can't say Caesar is Lord. So how do you draw that line? And what's the basis upon which you draw that line? That is going to be something that we should be thinking about now, not after.
Do you feel that as far as they can now, and within a kind of legal framework, Christians are able to join the Right for Life march or whatever it might be, the ways in which they should still do those things. They get out there and campaign for Christian values as far as they see them. They should do that. And when they no longer have the right, perhaps even to do that, to make proclamation of their beliefs in public, what do you do with the governing authorities? Are we supposed to sort of say, okay, we're going to keep this private now, or do you go again? Is there some point at which civil disobedience is necessitated, I suppose?
At the point where I can no longer speak the truth to others as I am commanded by Christ is when I have to stand with the apostles and say, whether it is right to obey you or God, that's up to you. As for me, I'm going to obey God. And
you will suffer whatever consequences come from that, imprisonment, whatever it might be. Okay, so I'm much more familiar, obviously, with where this might square off on a Christian basis. If we look at, very often people do go to the example of the early church here. Abdullah, what for you is the way to do this? Because, again, there are people out there, I think, who would say when they see Islam squashing up against secular values, they see often quite angry people, chanting, burning, if it's someone has put up, cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, there's often what looks like violent kind of responses to it, where people get very angry. And I think a lot of people are worried that that's what we're going to see when those crunch points come. We're going to see Islam getting angry, which is maybe a little bit different to what James is describing with the way he thinks Christians should be responding.
Well, I mean, we had a blasphemy law in this country until just the 2000s, so it wasn't that long ago when to gratuitously blaspheme Christian doctrines was not allowed. But to critically engage and discuss Christian doctrines was allowed. And in terms of Muslims as a obviously we're a minority community in England and also United States. Our kind of activities are governed by what we'd view in the Quran as the Quran says, cooperate in the good and do not cooperate in the evil. So we can cooperate with anyone for the good causes, for the just causes, and obviously when we see injustice, we speak out against it. And just to kind of demonstrate as a proof of concept, people think that, you can't criticize Islam in the UK or in the United States, which I see from certain right wings kind of sources say that. And we as Muslims, we welcome critique, we welcome debate. And one of the reasons why I set up a Muslim Debate Initiative, my organization, was to give a platform to critical voices against Islam, to kind of silence those right-wing voices, and also to show someone on the left wing who think that the only way to make society cohesive is to get everyone to agree with each other. So no, you don't have to agree with each other. We're inviting debate. We're inviting the strongest critics of Islam. We're giving them a platform, and not only just moderate voices, so to speak, on the political spectrum, like my colleague James, but also voices which are viewed to be very extreme voices, even like the far right we invited to give a platform to say, okay, you want to express your conspiracy theories about Islam and Muslims, we're giving you a platform. And we actually tried to set up a debate with Tommy Robinson in central London, and that actually got shut down, not by Muslims. Muslims were fully supportive of that. It was actually by left-wingers who said, do not give a platform to fascists, right? So we want to promote critical debate and discussion. That just because Muslims here doesn't mean that we don't want anyone to say to speak negatively about Islam or to critique Islam. As I said, I view no greater let's say robust critique of Islam from a Christian perspective than James White. And I can't know any others on top of my head, and yet he's well known in the Muslim community. He's invited, he's welcomed, despite the fact that he's never pulled any punches with us. He's never stinted on advancing the Christian perspective. So I feel that Muslims and Christians have scope to work together to show that, look, we can disagree, but where we agree, we can work together politically, peacefully campaign. So we should stand in solidarity with each other for the values that we hold in common and engage in political projects for that purpose.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes the world around us makes unlikely bedfellows of certain people. And I've seen this actually, interestingly, with some atheist Christian coalitions where some secularists have felt like certain laws that were being drafted at the time about hate speech would actually stop, for instance, comedians being able to make fun of religion and that kind of thing. And you
saw extremism laws as well.
Extremism laws and so on. So it's interesting. Sometimes you do get interesting coalitions of people with different reasons for why they don't want their freedoms to be.
But what Abdullah just said is central to what I really wanted to say here toward the end, and that is, we can show respect for one another. We can work with one another. We can recognize that what's going on with someone else is going to be relevant to us. in the United States, I see such a fear on the part of Christians to say anything positive about Muslims having freedoms in our society and stuff like that, because they think that's somehow compromise.
Okay.
It's not compromise. As long as, and Abdullah just said it, he is not in the slightest bit confused about where I'm coming from. He doesn't think I'm compromising my beliefs. He doesn't think that I'm laying any of this aside just to simply get along. He knows exactly where I stand. And as long as we're open with one another and understand, that's why I emphasized earlier, when Yasser Qadhi and I had that dialogue, we talked about this is what I want for you. And as long as that can be out there and it isn't hidden back here. See, our society is saying, put all that back here. That can cause division. No. Put it out there as the center, talk about it, debate it, and then having done that, be willing to then work with one another so that we can continue having those conversations. Look, I've visited the Stasi prison in Germany. We don't want to be going there, but there are trends right now in both of our countries that are taking us back there. And the main thing they wanted to do in that Stasi prison was to break you, to make you think like the state. The state is not designed to do that. And that should be something that Christians and Muslims together are like, can't go there. Okay.
Well, look, it's been a really interesting conversation on the show today. Perhaps you're listening and you've got a different point of view. You're more than welcome to send it in. See what responses we get to today's discussion on secularism. You can email in unbelievable@premier.org.uk, and I'll give out the other ways to get in touch as well shortly. But for the moment, James and Abdullah, thank you very much for being with me on today's show.
It's been great to be with you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.